Closing remarks. Yes, it's time for that, right? First, I want to say I am deeply moved by the fact that you would take the time to read my work and to write papers or give comments on it. I'm deeply moved in ways in which I have no clear way to express or neat way to express. And I'm deeply appreciative of it. I'm also deeply appreciative for the time that the graduate students have taken out of their hectic schedules to come and sit and listen to your papers. Even if they didn't have an opportunity to present, they've come in day after day to hear your papers and to listen to you. So I'm deeply appreciative of them. And so, I mean, that's the kind of first thing I want to put on the table is my sense of appreciation for the work that you're doing and what it means. I was in Vienna some time ago, last year, at a conference, and on pragmatists. It was a pragmatist conference, the European Pragmatist Association. And I think I said, I raised discussions about, whether or not pragmatism as a philosophy was viable. But in the discussions, sometimes my associates who are pragmatists, I'm saying, well, I don't know if you have pragmatists at all talking to me. And I said, I don't really care. You don't have any problems in saying that something was Rortian, You don't have any problems with something's Kantian, even though it's rationalist. You don't have any problems in doing that. But you've got a problem in saying that something is heresy. What's your problem? I don't care whether I'm pragmatist or not. If I am, fine. If I'm not, okay. But you need to overcome the problem of trying to characterize me as an example of a kind. As an Afro-American philosopher, you're not allowed to say anything other than it's Afro-American. If you're Chinese, you're not allowed to say anything but it's really Chinese. In Korean, whatever you're saying is really Korean. It's not really something that we ought to take into account. Well, you need to get over that. I don't know if I made any friends at the European Congress. I don't know if I made any enemies either, any more than I had when I came. But I do think that that's been a valuable feature of this project. I want to thank all of you for participating in it in one way or another, in your critiques, in your clarifications, in your definitions, in your ways of thinking that are different than mine, and your ways of thinking that where I found applying something limiting, or where I need to develop something. I'm appreciative of the time that you took to look, independent, as well as what it is that you found. My mother used to say, know the things that you can change and the things that you can't. I know the difference between the two. She also used to say, give me my roses while I can still smell them. You're giving me my roses, and I am appreciative of them, while I can still smell them. So I think I should tell my mother that that's happened for me. I gave her her roses while she could still smell them. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And closing remarks. Okay. It's a conference on the relationship between the God Deleuze and me. And the idea was to find lines of convergence. And I think you've done that. Very important lines of convergence. The first one by Lee McBride. Lee, I think, has a special place in my personal history. It's because of Lee, in some sense, that the philosophy of Wonder Struggle was able to see the light of day. He said, this is, he asked me if I could put together these articles. I said, well, yeah, you're going to put together all of them, and he wrote the introductions to all of them. So it was a wonderful time for him and I to engage in what these things meant, because he was wrong most of the time, and it was a lot of work. Brother, it's not an easy project. Yeah, I want to let you know that. But he did a wonderful job of systematizing it, just so you could see what I was up to in a lifetime of labor. And so I'm deeply appreciative for what he did in that regard. So he says, first of all, you want to be published a book? I said, no, it's not going to be a book that I publish by myself. It's going to be a dual publication. Because your brain is in here too, not just mine. And I'm deeply appreciative of that, you know. Were it not for him, I don't know if it would see the light of day. Because I kept producing, but not ever stopping to see what I produced. I never stopped to look, you know. That's like somebody asked me, when did you start traveling? I said, I started traveling a long time ago. I constantly traveled as a young man. When did you go on vacation? I really didn't go on a vacation until my wife took me on one. I went, go relax somewhere. What? What's that? How you do that? What that cost? Yeah. Yeah. I didn't do that, you know. So I sometimes recognize what I did not do. I didn't do that, you know. If it were not for him, it wouldn't have gotten done. He did it, you know. And I'm appreciative for that. All right, lines of convergence. I think it's important that the lines of convergence existed in the first place, to see the relationship between two philosophers who are operating in very different worlds and who come from very different locations. Because philosophy does come of a place. I think Deleuze recognizes that, and I think part of what we've done is to see where his place is, and well, to some degree, my place. This is the second of these kinds of convergences. The first was in Portugal, with the philosophy of the South. To look at the convergence of philosophy on the struggle, and what philosophy of the South looked like. And a tremendous number of sociologists are doing the kind of work that they saw in philosophy of the struggle. But that's South America based in Portugal, and the Portuguese activities within South America. This is in France, you know, European texture, so to speak. Lines of convergence that at least initiated, you know, I think it was important to think about what philosophy means. Now, I'm really appreciative for his paper because it raises the question of what does philosophy mean. My last book will be, what then is philosophy? You know, someone asked me, I think it was Leo, someone said, why are you saying what then? Why don't you just say what is? But the reason is very simple. We've been asking these questions for eons. What is philosophy? You know, long before there were Greeks, you know, the Buddhist tradition had asked that question long before there were any Greeks. What is philosophy? You know, it's a very old question. They also said, you know, we can't answer that question by using language. So that question has been very long, a long time. So what consequently, after all this time, given all these different kinds of answers, philosophy is a way of life. Philosophy is reasoning. Philosophy is a methodology of rationality. Philosophy is transcendence. Philosophy is looking at fundamental issues. Philosophy is looking at concepts. What, after all of this time, is it? You can't figure this out after all this time? What's the problem here? So that's why the book is, and that's why some of the material is entitled, What Then Is It? It is intended to be poetic. It's not intended to be analytic. I was educated in analytic philosophy. I have a pretty good idea what that looks like. Saul Kripke, Norman Krebsman, Alan Wood, they're all analysts. So I know what I'm stepping away from. Right? So I think leads for his paper on raising the question of the conversion between Deleuze and me and what counts as philosophy, where the lines are. And I appreciate for Reyes' account, raising the question of what counts as an ethic, particularly an anti-ethic. And I appreciate for Chu's account, asking the question of what is the self? I reject the view of a unified self in the first place. The theory of the self as a unified entity in which we're going to seek knowledge. So I think that's an important issue, and in some ways it's quite compatible with the Buddhist approach for the disappearance of the self. But then I'm disappearing the unified self. I'm very appreciative for Gil's account, worrying about whether or not you can have an explanation, and the importance of a systematic explanation to look at racism, particularly in relation to social dominance theory. But the actual earlier account is descriptive. It doesn't say explanations are no good or no use, but that you can't have one for some things that are very valuable. It says that depictions and explanations do things that depictions cannot do. But depictions can do things that explanations cannot do. Poetry can say things that analytic propositions can't say. There's no sense in saying we only have to have analytic propositions or propositions that tells us the truth, as if the poetic doesn't tell you anything. It does. It just can't be reduced to the other. That's all. So I'm appreciative for that account because it really does make you look at some of the ways in which death is happening and how people are being killed in a disproportionate ways in which they are killed. I'm very appreciative for Mary Adler's account because it forces me to look at hierarchies and racisms and insidious and invidiousness of it, ways I hadn't really thought about. There's a difference between race and racism, but and the hierarchical picture of it. I'm appreciative for Lily raising the question of what does flight mean? What exactly does that entail? I mean, what are you talking about, flight? What kind of flight is this? Especially, what kind of flight is it that ends in death? I mean, are those the only? Hopefully, we can come up with some other models besides flight that ends in death. So that worries me a bit. Hopefully, we can find some other ones. I'm appreciative for Duncan reading me through Deleuze. Making an importance of augmentation of sensation. That account reading me on one hand through Deleuze, and then on the other hand, Chris's account, where Chris reads Deleuze through me. And those two things are very different. But it tells us a great deal about what's going on. When you read me through Deleuze, you get a certain kind of picture. And I'm appreciative for what those issues raise when you do that reading, because they raise some very difficult issues. I'm appreciative for the graduate students, especially they worry about what next being happens to be, what the lines of flight are, and what counts as a community. Communities are very often things which are fundamentally anti-absolute. That is, they're not really real. They appear as real, but they're not really stable. But what counts as a community? And what kind of community do you really want at the end of the day? As well as, I'm appreciative for the graduate students telling me, promoting the consideration of the importance of the body and the soul. Because necrobeing is not just corporal death. It's a death of the person itself. The other side of that is the importance of dignity in this regard. The negation of it, the impossibility of it under those conditions. Both happen. I'm appreciative for Leonard Lawson's account. I'm worrying about the need for the imperatives. It is true that I have imperatives. Definite imperatives. This is maybe an aside, so to speak. Now I'll come back to it later. But those imperatives are not grounded. There's no ground there. There's no ultimate truth being revealed There's no constant rationality. There's no algorithm that's going to get you there. Sometimes what worries me about intellectuals or contemporary philosophers, including Deleuze, is that they don't make a commitment. They don't say, this is what it is I believe. I don't have an account. If you're genuinely a relativist, you can't have one anyway. I don't have a foundation upon which to base this. It may not be practical. Okay. You've given you the best arguments that I can for it. I've given you the best argument for saying why natural being is the worst form of racism that there could ever be. There's nothing worse than natural being. What kind of theory could you have that tells you that something is worse than this? What's the name of that theory that says something is worse than non-existence? What's the name of that theory that says that something is worse than perpetual misery, shortening of life? What kind of theory is that that's going to say this is worse than that? You're going to lose your soul. You lose your soul in this misery. Undue harm, constant fear, loss of life. What kind of theory is going to say what's worse than that? If it's I don't like that theory. If you got one, you should abandon it. Get rid of it. It's not a really good thing to have. Send it to the dustbin of history. Yeah, you're right. And I do recognize that there is sometimes a difference between my approach and the approach of others, because I make it explicit without remainder and without apology and without further expropriation. Not a condition that says, well, I discovered a new concept, or this is where you get at the end of the day. I don't know if that counts. I know that counts as an imperative, and I think Locke was right. We live by imperatives all the time. You have children, you raise them, you have friends, you lament the people that you love who passed. You live by imperatives. The kinds of beings that we are require imperatives. We don't need an excuse for that. I'm appreciative of Dan's account and looking at the actuarial situation. The ways in which the actuarial account is in some sense deeply ambiguous, because it was an account that were used by slave owners, slave ships. And I'm using that. So you have this duality going. But he also said something that was very important. It made me think about something. He didn't say it, but I'm going to put it in his mouth anyway. Technology has no mate. It has no husband. It has no wife. It has no children. It doesn't love anybody. It's neutral. It doesn't matter. And the idea that somehow it's going to liberate you sounds really strange. Why would you think a non-sentient entity is going to liberate you by its use? How does that work? So yeah, I think that was fascinating the way I look forward to the development of that. I appreciate Brent's account and the imperative and the genealogy. A genealogical account can be very descriptive and depictive, but it still can't do the work of making a definitive commitment. So I think you're right about that. There is a slight difference. Not a hard difference, but a slight one. Philosophy of life. Yeah, I don't know about that, man. I don't know what these people are thinking. I wish I would. I already mentioned Chris and the importance of the reading that he has. And I think that he was right on that reading. It's very interesting reading. I've prodded Lacey for years to do what she's been doing, but she's already been doing it. And she's done everything else. I said, Lacey, write about this. No. Lacey, do this. Write about this. No. Maybe later. So it's been like 20 years of saying, Lacey, this is the best chapter in dissertation. No, it's not. I mean, what do you have to do? To go to lunch. I pay for lunch. No. Okay. So I'm appreciative of her insight, the way in which she's in that argument. is not a straw man. You know, is much more laced, and so you bring that to the table that nobody else can. You know, so I'm appreciative of Lace's approach. I'm appreciative of Proveniti's approach of the maroonage and the problems associated with this, and health problems associated with not just all kinds of racism, including micro racism, and what that means to persons in everyday lives, and how you can actually track it, to talk about the ways in which black people's lives are lessened by virtue of racism, both macro and micro. And you can track it in terms of their DNAs and life expectancy rates. But that's just one population that's facing necrobeing, not the only population on the planet that's facing necrobeing. And you're right that I do get that concept to some degree from Mbebe, and have taken it to do very different sorts of things with it, altogether different. So that's very true. The themes that I think, in some ways, that are continually important, I think, for us to think about, is the ways in which necrobeing exists in the real world. I think, and someone mentioned the bombing of the archives in the Palestinian territory. That's part of what it is you're trying to erase somebody's memory, somebody's history. That's what traditions do. But necro tragedy means, in part, that you don't get to repair that in some sense. It doesn't get to come back. But in some sense, once you see necro tragedy for what it really is, hopefully you'll be more motivated to try and stop it. I know that it's a terrible thing. I intend for you to look at it in that way, to see that you cannot fix the past. It's not going to come out, and the leather workers of London in the 11th century are not particularly redeemed because the steel workers of London get a raise. No. The leather workers got beat down and died early. And most of them, we don't know who they were anyway. And the salaries of the steel workers in London and England doesn't fix that. And I doubt seriously whether any steel worker in England or automobile worker in England is worried about the leather workers in the past. How much they matter to them. It isn't that, I think Hegel was just wrong. There's not a nice, neat line of history. History has not a neat memory, such that every event matters and produces the next valuable event. That's a nice picture of a delusional German who's infested with egomaniacal sensibilities about what he knows about the whole universe for all past time and all future time. Seek professional help. No. Yes, the tragic is horrible. But it is a different conception of the tragic than Nietzsche's. It is a different conception of tragic than Aristotle. Yes, it is. Different conception of tragic than the pragmatist view. Loss of opportunity to express myself, to make my choice. The tragic is sadly irredeemable. I think there was one person who mentioned that Foucault was with in her work, the people who are not, not seen. Yes. The only recognition for them is they were suffering. He was a horrible atheist, and then that was it. That's the only record of that person. They're not seen. Yes, that's necro tragedy. It's there. And so I'm not willing to walk away from it. And I know that it's a different conception of the tragic. And I'm willing to defend that conception of the tragic. Another way to think about this, that matches with some of your papers on artificial intelligence is the importance of the way in which contemporary forms of technology produces predatory efficiencies, ways in which contemporary forms of creativity helps maximize immiseration, exploitation, and new ways of living and experimentation allow for the misuse of your information through social media. So I think we're looking at new forms of the tragic. And hopefully we'll have found some new forms of overcoming the tragic. I've already said that I admit that insurrectionist ethics, or at least a good deal of insurrectionist ethics, is not grounded. And I'll stand by that, continuing going forward. I think that the themes that you put on the table are the things that matter. They really do matter. Once you step away from the Socratic and the Platonic world, then you're in a very different place altogether. I have a couple of stories that I've written about Plato. I'm not going to bore you with them, but one of the stories, these titles, I can't figure out what title to use. And I don't know. I told somebody about these titles before, and I said, I don't know what title to use. And one title is called like Plato's Uncle Tom revealed Socrates. Another title, it says the cave dwellers in the allegory of the cave sends Socrates to the latrine to clean the latrine. Oh man, that's cold running. So I don't know what title to use, but the idea is that the cave dwellers in the allegory of the cave are unnamed. They should have names. Why aren't they given a name? What are their names? They're a kind of thing, just cave dwellers. And the debate between Euthyphro and Socrates in the dialogue, Plato's dialogue with the Republic. Euthyphro has a dialogue with Plato. What's the nature of piety? Right? I've used this in an undergraduate class a couple of times. I like it. I like it even more nowadays. I take the side of Euthyphro. Socrates wants to know, what is the nature of piety? And Euthyphro can't answer him. The nature of piety is what I'm doing now. So Socrates, well, that doesn't tell me the nature of piety. I need to be able to know what counts as an act of piety whenever I see it, so I need to know the nature of it, so that I can pick it out. What Euthyphro fails to do is to ever challenge Socrates' criteria for what counts as the right answer. What would count as the right answer to the nature of piety, Socrates? What would that look like? And how would you know it if you heard it? So he never really does it. So I said, well, let's fix Euthyphro. Fix him up, help him out a little bit, you know what I mean? Have him beat down Plato. And so I have a story about that, but I'm not going to tell you to. You have to wait till the movie comes out. But if you're going to do that kind of work, then I don't want to spend my time going over Plato and Socrates. I don't want to have a conversation with them. I want to produce creativity. I want to create a different platform altogether. A different line of flight where we don't die in the end. Where our heroes are not just losers. Where we imagine a different world. Why can't I imagine a different world? What is it about me that says the only thing I can do is read other people who imagine a different world? 1844, Marx's, a manuscript. I mean, he's imagining a different world. Rousseau imagines a very different world. Why can't I imagine a different world? Why do I have to only imagine race? Why can't I imagine what the world would look like without it? Why can't I imagine that? Why am I limited to only imagining utopias that are a variation of the present? I mean, Du Bois imagined a very different world than the one he lived in. Why can't I do that? The author of Islam, Christianity, and the Negro Race imagined a world that was nothing like the one he lived in. Nothing. The author of Adulthood Rights, she imagined a world that doesn't exist. If she can do that, why can't I? So I think we should imagine different worlds than what it is. You know, we don't have to just imagine this one. You know, we don't have to just limit our creativity to a reproduction of the present. Why should we do that? So that's part of the project that I hope to continue to promote. And I am appreciative for all of the work that you've done in your own ways to create a different world. So, in ending this conference, let me give you a word of the philosophy of reform. All concessions yet made from our August claims have been born of struggle. That struggle might be a moral one, that struggle might be a physical one, but there must be a struggle. Power conceives nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. Frederick Douglass, 1854. A Luther continue on. Thank you.